Yo, what's up? It's your boy, The Clinician, and your boy is back bringing you with another episode here at Comics and Coffee, where we talk that good stuff of comics. And I've already drank my cup of Joe today, so don't have it with me. But what I do have is today's topic. And what we're going to talk about is a book that I've been reading for a while, actually an omnibus that I've been reading after several months. And the omnibus, of course, you guys probably have heard me reference it in previous episodes, is A Journey into Mystery. So this, for those of you guys who do not know, Journey into Mystery is a title that was published by Marvel during, I believe it actually started in the golden age of comics and bled into the silver age. And it was more known so for being more of like a sci-fi type of comic book. Actually, a couple of characters, a Groot in particular, made his first appearance in a Journey into Mystery issue. So there's a lot of sci-fi, a lot of space adventures. Even Hulk, before he was Hulk, was in this Journey into Mystery. It was a different Hulk. It wasn't the Hulk that we've come to know today, but there was another character in Journey into Mystery that actually went by the Hulk. And I thought that was pretty interesting. But the key thing about it, though, what makes Journey into Mystery very significant is Journey into Mystery 83. And the significance of Journey into Mystery 83 is it's the first appearance of my favorite character, Thor. So, as you guys know, I'm a huge Thor fan, and I've been, reading Thor for a long time. And, one of the biggest things that, that I always wanted to do was go back to the older issues and really learn more about the origins of a lot of these characters that I've grown to like love over the years, like Loki, the Enchantress, Scourge the Executioner, Absorbing Man, like all these like iconic Thor villains that, I know and love today were all started and rooted in this run of Journey into Mystery. So, like I always tell people, a lot of times, when you're looking at comics and, if you're growing up in the modern age, it can be really difficult to go back to like older stuff. Me personally, I've never had an issue with it. Like, my first my first introduction into Thor was Dan Jurgens' run of Thor. And then I remember really liking that issue, but it wasn't until I really got into Thor Disassembled, when he got into that run of Thor Disassembled, that I was like, yo, Thor is lit, man. I really need to go back and read some more of his stuff. So then I went back to the Walt Simonson area, and that's when I just completely fell in love with this character, his storyline, his origins, everything about him, which is very fascinating to me. And that's actually a story I'm going to tell you about as it relates to that Walt Simonson run once I get that. But that's a topic for a later day, and I will get to that. But that particular run is really what got me into the character, just all in. And I've always wanted to go back to the earlier issues, but the thing with me is I'm more of a purist, so I feel like I'm old school. I have to have a hard copy. I have to have something tangible that I can touch, that I can, read, I can hold, and I'm not really much into the digital era. I know a lot of people are like, oh man, you can read a lot of stuff like digitally, and yeah, that's true, but I'm just not really much of a digital guy. I really would rather prefer actually getting the hard copy. So I was waiting for a while, and for it to release in trade or Omni, and lo and behold, they did a release of the volume 1 of Journey into Mystery, which pretty much contains this particular omnibus pretty much contains everything from issue 83 up until like 120, and then it goes into the annual. So it's missing like a couple of issues, but for the most part, it has pretty much most of the Journey into Mystery run that Thor was in. And eventually what happens with that is, I believe after Journey into Mystery 125, that Journey into Mystery title fizzles out altogether, and it just becomes a complete Thor run. Because before, Thor was actually sharing, I believe, a comic book with some other stories that were going on, but over time it just ended up becoming a Thor title, and Thor's name actually just became prominent in the Journey into Mystery run because he became such a popular character, because it started off just the Journey into Mystery, and then it eventually just turned into, that Thor run. But the cool thing about it, though, and what I really loved about this particular run, as I'm looking through it, is it has like a certain, even though I wasn't growing up in the 60s, the art itself has a certain like rawness and nostalgia to it. Like, and what I mean by that is it kind of reminds me, well, it actually is. This is where a lot of this stuff comes from. When I was younger, my dad used to have these old like Marvel like VHS cassette tapes. And in the tapes, it would basically do, like, if you guys ever remember like still shots where they would show like the actual comic book of something, and but it's like a still shot, and they would make noises and sound effects would still be going on. They would move the image around to make it look like it's like actually in motion. It was kind of like that. So it was like a still image type of movie, and they had like they used to have different characters. Like they had, like, Captain America had one, Thor had one, Iron Man had one, and the Hulk had one. And yeah, I remember like watching, viewing these characters when I was little, and seeing this. So looking at these comics, it reminds me that, because a lot of those things were pulled like from that VHS tape, or those shows were pulled from the actual comics. So if you guys ever get a chance, check those out. It's like an old, you probably YouTube it nowadays, YouTube anything, but it's like, just check out like old Marvel shows, and they used to have like these quirky, corny theme songs, man. Like Captain America had one that just like stays stuck in my head, all the time. That they used to play all the time, and I can remember it to this day. But but yeah, looking at the artwork though, the artwork to me, even to this day, even though it was made in the 60s, I still love this artwork. I mean, I think Jack Kirby does such a great job of capturing, this epic tale of Thor. I mean, I think he just nails it. Him and Stan were just like on a whole nother level with it. And I mean, I love everything about this artwork. I love the shading, the panels that he used. Like, you look at some of these pages, like the colors just pop. Like the inking was just like incredible, for its time. And I just love the work of, what Jack Kirby did with this character. And, to be honest with you, I feel like a lot of times you think of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, you think of Fantastic Four, and you think of, the Hulk, and you think of, a couple other titles that, that were kind of going on during that run. And yeah, Thor is in that mix too. But what I will also say is a lot of people put Fantastic Four as, that epic run. And I won't argue that. But I also think his Thor run, Jack Kirby and Stan's Thor run is like really epic too. Now, granted, early on, it was kind of a mixed bag with Kirby doing the artwork sometimes. And he would they would alternate with other artists that would take over. And you can definitely tell, when Kirby did it versus when someone else did it, right? And no slight to the other artists, but Kirby just has a certain like signature, that he has with his shading, how he does his artwork, his energy bubbles, just everything about Kirby was just like very innovative for his time. So what makes it so cool is going back now and reading all these stories, and really seeing how these characters started off. It just makes me appreciate the foundation that Jack and Stan laid down, for this Thor character and for the Thor mythos all together. Him being a Norse god, it was kind of very interesting that they made that choice to go with that. I mean, they could have went with the Greek gods, they could have gone with Egyptian gods, but they went with Norse mythology. I just thought that was really interesting that they did that. And, granted, Thor is actually a character that was carried over by Jack Kirby. He had actually written this character during the golden age, during the 50s. I think it was Atlas Comics at the time, if I'm not mistaken. But that rendition of Thor was a lot different than the one we've come to love and know today during the Silver Age run, which was in the 60s. So they basically just revamped the character They brought him in because they already had him, you know. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then tying everything in. Now, in terms of the storytelling and in terms of, you know, what's going on, right? So, you know, not going to go through each issue. I'll kind of go over some key points, you know, throughout the omnibus that stood out to me. You know, the first issue, but really goes over Thor's origin, or really not even his origin, just more or less how Thor reemerges. So basically, Dr. Donald Blake, he's chilling, you know, in Europe somewhere. I think it's like Norway or somewhere in Europe. And all of a sudden, these like they're attacked by, you know, the country's attacked by these aliens like from Saturn, these like lava men from Saturn. And if you ever seen the movie Thor Ragnarok, the character of Korg, who plays one of the rock men or the lava men, you know, as you can see these characters here, he's one of the characters. This is where they got him from. And they actually had already made an appearance in previous Journey into Mystery issues. So they had been around. So they predate, you know, this Thor run. But anyway, they're invading Earth and they're trying to take over. And, you know, basically Donald Blake, who is, you know, a doctor who has like a lame leg, like he's limp essentially, so he can't really walk. He's like hobbling over. It's like a cave, and he finds this like cane, and he uses it like kind of as a walking stick. And well, as he, taps it by mistake, he mistakenly becomes Thor, and he realizes by tapping this cane that first he taps the cane. Let me rephrase it. So he finds the cane he finds the cane, then he taps it. It turns into a hammer, and then the hammer basically has an enchantment on it. It has that famous incantation. Whosoever holds this hammer, should he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. Right. So you see it down here. So he finds the hammer. And then basically he picks it up because he is worthy, and then he becomes Thor. Now, we would later find out in later issues that the reason that, Donald Blake or Thor is trapped in the body of Donald Blake was because Odin wanted to teach Thor humility. And, when Thor was younger, he was a lot more brash, a lot more egocentric, very cocky. And Odin wanted to humble him. And Odin himself is a very interesting character. And, we'll talk a little bit more about him too. But, sticking with this particular story, he turns into Thor. And, with that power, he now has, the power of Thor once he picks the hammer. The key thing, though, with this particular run, and this is one of the things that is kind of a slight, but I kind of see why they did it. If Thor is separated from his hammer longer than 1 minute, or 60 seconds, then he turns back to Donald Blake. So he has to keep the hammer on hand with him at all times while he's Thor. But essentially he gets the hammer, he goes to the lava men, he attacks them, fights them off, and they basically run with their tail between their legs, and that's that. So that's our little origin story of Thor. So as time progresses, Thor becomes more acclimated with this universe, and people get to know him. People are starting to recognize him as a hero. And, one of the cool elements about it is that the early stories of this particular run, a lot of times people, I think, shy away from this type of material because they feel like a lot of the stories are just kind of like hokey, and the storytelling is very villain of the week. So they're very self-contained stories where it's just kind of like, okay, you meet this villain, you fight this villain, Thor saves the day, and like that's that, right? Villain comes in, comes up with a plan. Thor, refutes the plan, beats the bad guy, and that's that. That's pretty much the end of the story. So there's a lot of, I get it, and early on it is that. I mean, there is a lot of hokiness in it. It does get a little campy, and but you have to understand this is a 60s comic, so the times were a lot different. But with that being said, I still enjoyed it. I really did enjoy the earlier issues because it was still fun. seeing all these characters come to life and what they were doing with them during that time. Like, I actually really enjoyed it. Even with Loki and how his whole thing. So like Loki comes in Journey to Mystery 85, right? And Loki was actually trapped, in this tree. He was being punished by Odin for something he had did, just being Loki, being the god of mischief. And the only way he could be released from basically the tree, because Odin had placed an enchantment on it, was for somebody to shed a tear for Loki. Well, one day, Heimdall, who, if you guys watch the MCU movies, is played by Idris Elba, right? So he's the eyes and ears of Asgard, where he sees everything, that's going on. He's he's patrolling the area, and he's going into the forest where Loki's tree is at. And Loki manipulates one of the leaves of the tree to basically fall down and, brush against Heimdall's eye, which, if something hits your eye, you're going to naturally shed a tear. Well, he ended up shedding a tear. The leaf was connected to Loki. Loki was the tree. So technically, Heimdall shed a tear for Loki. Right. I know it's a little quirky. I know. But hey, it is what it is. And Loki got free. So that's how Loki gets free and starts his mischief, right? So let's go a little bit into the character of Thor and Loki. So Loki is interesting. So the Loki that we probably have become accustomed to today in the MCU is different than this Loki back in the day. So like in the earlier stories, it was a cat and mouse game with Thor and Loki. So Loki would devise a scheme, and basically Thor had to figure it out. Thor usually figure it out, solve the puzzle, and beat Loki, and throw him back in jail or take him back to Asgard. Loki's biggest thing, though, was he's always been jealous of his brother, right? That was the biggest problem that Loki had, because he always felt that Odin showed favoritism to Thor. And for the most part, he really did. And when you start getting into the later issues, when it really starts to pick up steam, is Journey into Mystery 97. That is where you're first introduced to the Tales of Asgard. That's where you get a lot of background, I feel, for the character of the Thor mythos. So you really learn the early days of Thor. And man, to me, to be quite honest with you guys, early on, I gotta say, Tales of Asgard to me was outshining the actual Thor issues, like the Journey into Mystery issues. Like, the stories were okay. Like I said, they were like self-contained. They were like these villain of the week type of stories. Loki would pop up here and there as a recurring villain, but all in all, they were just okay, and they were still kind of hokey at the time. Where you really get into the storytelling and you see the potential of like where things could go with this character is the Tales of Asgard storyline. And Jack Kirby and Stan nailed it. I love Tales of Asgard. I really felt like they really did a lot of world building with Asgard. Like, you really got to see like how everything started from the humble beginnings of what would become, Thor. And one of the things is like Thor had to go through these trials. So like Thor had to prove, he didn't just get the hammer bestowed to him. He had to earn the hammer, right? So he had to prove that he was worthy, and he had to go through several tasks. Like, one task was he had to actually, him and Loki actually had to infiltrate the Storm Giants base to find the golden apples of Idon. And these apples basically are what keeps the gods young, right? It gives them immortality, so to speak, to keep them going. So they would go on these wild, quirky adventures, and just get into trouble, get into stuff. And I always thought that was really cool to see their banter, because Thor would always be the noble one and trying to do the right thing, and Loki was like very selfish and trying to get his brother into trouble and trying to manipulate the situation to basically get Thor in some mess, essentially. And boy, was he doing that. And I always thought it was really cool because they did tie in, like there was continuity with the Tales of Asgard stories that carried over it, but they were like, each kind of had his own thing going. So you find out the origins of Boulder the Brave and how he was how he got that title. Like Odin tested him. Like he, literally had this man stand up and had things thrown at him, arrows thrown at him just to see, and Boulder couldn't flinch. Stuff like that, and he really tried to see what was good, was really good with you. Like, how down are you? Are you say you Boulder the Brave? Well, show me that you brave, then, bro. Like, for real, straight like that. So I thought it was really cool how these stories like came into fruition, and I really felt like the Tales of the Asgard, really was the start, and that's when you really started to see the consistency between Jack and Stan really just like working together, right? And they just had that cohesiveness with just staying together pretty much for the remainder of the series. Now you still have like little off and ons in the actual issue of Journey into Mystery. So like you'd have the whole Journey into like the regular story of what's going on in the present times with Thor, and then to go into the Tales of Asgard end. All those are staying in Jack. I believe probably around, I want to say Journey into Mystery 112 is when you pretty much had a whole run, right? From 112 to the end of this omnibus is just nothing but staying in Jack 100% from then on. So yeah, I really, really loved like the Tales of Asgard. I'm gonna see if I can find some older stories, some Tales of Asgard for you guys. Yeah, here we go. So as you can see, like I love this. Like, this is beautiful artwork. Like, I love the splash page on the right. Like, the colors just pop, man. I mean, like, I love like mythology. I love like, that's why I'm always appealed to Thor, because he has that, I just love the mythos behind it. Like there's so much mysticism. It has kind of that lore, that fantasy type of appeal. And the cool thing I've always loved about Thor is that you could put him in any situation. You could put him in like the mystical stuff, or the fantasy type stuff, but then you could put him in like sci-fi stuff. He can go on space adventures. But then he can be a really grounded character. You can really put him in like on Earth, just fighting regular crime. Like you could put him in any situation, and I feel like you can really write some compelling stories. Like even with the grounded stuff, you can really show Thor's feel for humanity and really wanting to protect them and really loving the people there. And then you can also write his journey, the epic with Thor, where he's going on all these different journeys, like, to Jotunheim, to Niflheim, just all these different locations of the 9 realms, and just really like exploring and doing a lot of world building and going on these different quests and adventures. And that's really what Tales of Asgard shows. And this is just focus on Thor either. There's some Odin stories here, like this particular one. This is where you first meet Surtur. He's supposed to be like the end of he's the aftermath of Ragnarok. So after Ragnarok ends, Surtur pretty much cleans up shop with everything. His classic run was definitely during that Walt Simonson era, though, when he had the Doom sword. Man, Surtur was dope. But man, just the artwork was just so beautiful, and I just can't say enough about it. I just really enjoyed this. It was a really fun run. Even the hokey stuff, I really enjoyed the hokey stuff. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really appreciate Thor's weakness with him being separated from the hammer, but it put him in some interesting situations, and I get it, because you wanted to really, I think at the time they were feeling like they didn't want to make Thor too Superman-esque, because I do think that they were trying that early on. They were trying to make Thor kind of the Superman of Marvel, not so much in the way that they have the same type of personality, but in terms of like scaling, like Thor was pretty strong, doing stuff already, and I think they wanted to give him a significant weakness or handicap, so they don't not to make him too OP. He still had that nobility though, like Superman. I think there were a lot of similarities early on, with those two characters. But nonetheless, I still enjoyed it. But really where it hits its stride for me in terms of just like it being a well cohesive, put together story, I would say probably starts right around Journey into Mystery, like 114. Now, there's some other issues prior to that are pretty dope too. Don't get me wrong. There's some stuff here that's actually really cool. But I feel like in terms of just that consistency, 114, I think, is where it really starts picking up. And what happens in 114? So 114 is when we're introduced to the Absorbing Man. So the Absorbing Man, Crusher Creel, is basically a convict, who was in prison and at the time. And Loki wanted to basically, come up. He came up with a scheme where he knows Thor, right, has a soft spot for humans. So this is where the storytelling actually gets kind of crafty, because Loki's putting more thought, and you see the early workings of Loki being a little bit more manipulative. So Loki actually creates a potion and slips it in one of Absorbing Man's drinks. Well, when he does that, Absorbing Man ends up getting the power to basically absorb anything. So anything he touches, whether it be metal, wood, rock, whatever, he can absorb that particular material and become that. And it's actually a cool concept. And I feel like, honestly, Absorbing Man is one of the most underutilized Thor villains out there. Now, he's actually had some pretty cool run-ins with Hulk, but just as a villain in general, Crusher Creel is that dude. I really feel like they don't utilize him enough. Honestly, Crusher Creel is a problem. But nonetheless, this particular run, I really feel like he got to shine. And that first fight that he had with Thor, Thor wasn't really seeing him like that. That was actually one of Thor's more challenging villains. Even though I feel like Thor was kind of holding back because Thor doesn't really want to hurt humans. But at the same time, Crusher Creel was still giving him that work. So what happens during that time? So the whole point of, him giving this thing to Crusher Creel was so he could go ahead and kidnap Jane Foster. So that was Loki's whole thing. Loki knew that Thor is Donald Blake. He knows Thor is Donald Blake, and throughout the story, he would do things to try to, kidnap Jane Foster, or try to separate Thor from his hammer so he turned back and things of that nature. So Thor, Loki was always utilizing those two big weaknesses. Separate Thor from his hammer, kidnap Jane Foster. And the dynamic between, Thor and Jane Foster was always kind of interesting, because initially Jane Foster seemed to really be enamored or smitten with Dr. Donald Blake. She really, seemed to really like this guy, and the feelings seemed to be mutual. But it was almost like a will they, won't they type of situation, where they really never would say how the other person, say how they truly felt. And it was just a little subplot that was kind of brewing for the longest time. And one of the biggest things is that, Odin didn't really approve of it. Odin really didn't feel like immortals should be messing with mortals, and he was completely against it. So much so, Odin was, I'm just gonna be real, Odin was a not so nice father. I'm just gonna be real. I mean, Odin would do some shady stuff, yo. I like Odin, he's cool, but he was doing a lot of shady stuff, yo. So for example, Thor basically was just at a point where he was really wanting to tell Jane Foster his true identity. And that was one of the stipulations. Odin was like, no, you cannot tell her your true identity. You're not allowed to tell her who you are. If you do, there will be consequences. So Thor was like, man, forget that. F that. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I was like, oh, you want to do what you want to do? Oh, okay. He snapping his finger, took half of Thor's power. I was like, God dang. Then he ended up being in a situation where he had to fight two of his villains, Mr. Hyde and Cobra. And he almost lost that battle. Odin had to give him his power back. It was sad, man. He would do stuff like that. Or Odin would just be messing, trying to, Odin was easily manipulated by Loki, because Loki would see that and know that Odin really didn't approve of Thor wanting to be in a relationship with Jane Foster. So he would utilize that to his advantage, so much so that he tried to get the Enchantress at one point to seduce Thor. And it was just the whole thing, yo. It was crazy, yo. Odin was really not feeling that relationship. He always felt like he should be with another immortal like Sif, who would come way later, but someone like that. He was definitely not messing with him and Jane Foster. But with Jane and Donald Blake, it was almost kind of like a will they, won't they type of situation, and neither one will really ever pull the trigger until maybe later in the series. And at one point, Donald Blake did tell, like, I mean, he was going to give up being Thor and was just like, yo, he did tell her, like, hey, I am Thor. But, you know, she just never believed him. But she still stayed with him, and they ended up having a relationship towards the latter part of this particular series. So they did end up, you know, getting into a relationship, which was really cool. And she ended up, you know, liking Donald Blake over Thor because, you know, that was the other thing too. Donald Blake didn't feel like he was worthy enough to be with Jane because he was, you know, a limp doctor who, you know, wasn't strong like Thor or had, you know, could fly or had all these powers. He was just a human that was a doctor. So it was cool to see them finally get together. But back to the initial story, I was talking about Absorbing Man, so kind of off on a tangent a little bit. Forgive me, but you know, I love talking about Thor. That's my guy. So when we talk about like Absorbing Man and everything of that nature, so where you start to see the really good storytelling is they're starting to weave in better subplots. Like before, like with the one-off stories, there was not a lot of build-up of things going on. It was just kind of like a one-off. You had like a little side story with, you know, Donald Blake and Jane Foster. That was cool. You know, that was the only real subplot going on. Other than that, it was just pretty much a one-off. What I feel like that run of 114 through 120 pretty much brings is it starts weaving in the story more. So what I mean by that is, yeah, Loki put the Absorbed Man out there, you know, to fight Thor, but it was a strategic plan to serve as a distraction so he can get Jane Foster. And once he realized that, you know, while Thor was distracted, he ended up kidnapping Jane Foster, and I thought that was really cool. So while he's fighting Absorbing Man, Loki snatches up Jane Foster. Boulder basically, you know, hey, you know, alerts Thor. He, you know, removes him from the battle with Absorbing Man. It's like, yo, Loki got your woman, bro. You know what I'm saying? What you gonna do? You need to handle your business. Like, and Thor was like, what? And yeah, like, yo, he got your woman. So like, he ends up saving her. And when he confronts Loki about it, Odin was like, well, you gotta show proof, you know, the Asgardian way. So what that ends up leading to is Loki, of course, denies that he had nothing to do with kidnapping Jane Foster. As you know, humans aren't supposed to, Asgardians aren't supposed to interfere with humans, with the exception of Thor, apparently, because, you know, Thor is just Thor. But, you know, Loki wasn't supposed to interfere, and, you know, they had to go through what they call the trials. And basically, Odin said, okay, in order to prove who was telling the truth or not, you guys have to complete the trials. And the trials basically were where he put them on this planet. I think it was called, oh man, what was the name of that planet? I can't think of the name of it. It was in one of the 9 realms though. And it was basically like a realm that was made up mostly of lava. And they basically had to run to the, you know, whoever could get to find the portal first to get back to Asgard would win. And they would prove that they were, you know, telling the truth, right? So, of course, Loki, being the trickster that he is, doesn't tell the truth. And, you know, he ends up, you know, they're supposed to go in there with just no weapons, and he's going in there with the Norn Stone, the Norn Stones. And for those of you guys who don't know what the Norn Stones are, they were created by Carnilla, the Norn Queen, and they basically just make you OP as hell. Like, basically, they're like a plot device. So anytime Loki was in a situation where he had to jump through lava or get through something, he could teleport, he could manipulate things, and he was just getting a leg up on Thor. And essentially, he ended up winning it. And Thor was like, yo, dude cheated. And he threw you know, he used the Norn Stones. And Odin was like, well, show your proof. And Loki was like, I don't have no Norn Stones. And he threw the Norn Stones away before Odin could really like confront him on it. So what ended up so basically you spend the remainder of this run in the Omnibus with Thor basically trying to prove that Loki cheated. So therefore it would show that Thor actually won the race, which proved that Loki lied in the first place of not kidnapping Jane Foster, which would get Loki into trouble. And, Odin would, of course, give him his proper sentence. Asgardian logic, comic book logic, just go with it. I know it's completely crazy, right? Like, how is all this going to prove whether somebody's innocent or not because I completed a task? I have no clue. It's the Asgardian way. That's how they do things. That's what they do. But it led to some other pretty cool stories because while he's looking for the Norn Stones, he gets into a couple of different adventures. One in particular that was really cool was when he meets the Destroyer. Oh yes, man, the Destroyer armor, man. This was so badass. So the Destroyer armor was an armor created by Odin to fight off the Celestials. It basically is made of Uru metal and is nigh unstoppable. Like, you cannot miss the Destroyer armor. And to be honest with you, Thor had no chance of beating this armor. Well, of course, Loki, being the trickster that he is again, basically persuades this human to unlock the armor. So how the armor operates, basically, the person's soul becomes one with the armor. So there was this human, he was a pirate basically, or stealing treasure and stuff like that. Wanted to get riches. He finds the temple where the armor is at, and due to Loki manipulating him to find it, and his soul becomes overtaken by the armor. And basically he goes to attack Thor, per Loki, because Loki's still pulling the strings to prevent Thor from finding the Norn Stones. Because Loki knows if Thor finds those Norn Stones, he's in big trouble. So, he ends up fighting the Destroyer and has no chance. I mean, the Destroyer was just really not gonna lose to Thor. But this is where I think one of the cool points about Thor comes in. A lot of times Thor, you think of Thor as just being like all brawn and I'm strong, Thor strong. He's more than that. Thor actually is a smart dude. When it comes to battle strategy and battle tactics, Thor is actually not a dummy. He actually knows how to fight and he knows how to think. He's not just like a meathead, so to speak. He actually does think. And he ends up outsmarting the human or the armor that the human's in, the Destroyer, of course, and actually tricks the human into getting to the Destroyer armor into releasing the human soul, because without a soul, the Destroyer armor can't function, and the human soul goes back into him. Thor wins. He just uses his wits. He doesn't even have to. This is actually one battle Thor did not use brawn on, because he couldn't beat the Destroyer. He just wasn't going to beat the Destroyer, and the Destroyer can also pick up Mjolnir because technically he's not alive, or a living vessel. So by it being a machine or whatever, it's able to pick up the hammer. Again, comic book logic. That's what they do. But it was still a cool little story. So Thor eventually does get the Norn Stones. And basically, is headed back to let Odin know what is going on. And during this time, Odin, is waiting for Thor to come back. He confirms, like, hey, Loki was lying, but, Loki by this point is just like doing his own thing. He basically releases the Absorbing Man again, has him, as the Absorbing Man is working for Loki or helping Loki indirectly. And that's pretty much where we end the story on the Omnibus, which is really crazy because I really wanted to see how this plays out because it was getting really good. I really felt like it found its stride around this time, man, because it was just like issue after issue, it was just like starting to connect stories together. Everything was like flowing more cohesively, and the continuity made a lot more sense. And it was just like, man, this is actually getting really good. And, unfortunately, it just kind of ends and leaves you on a cliffhanger. We do get an annual that's pretty cool with Hercules, which I thought was really dope. It introduces the character of Hercules, who actually becomes one of Thor's biggest like allies throughout like comics. Like, they actually form a really good like brotherhood, a really good friendship. They do have their squabbles here and there, like brothers do, like brothers fight. But it was really cool. Like he basically goes to the story with this one is with the annual. Basically, it's like a prequel. So it goes back into it's kind of like a Tales of Asgard type of setting where somewhere before Thor got humbled, him and Loki were got into a conflict with the storm giants, and basically Thor ends up getting knocked off of a cliff. It inadvertently falls into like a portal that transports him to Olympus, and he meets like all these Greek gods, and he's seeing a lot of similarities between Mount Olympus and Asgard. And the whole thing of like Hercules and Thor meeting is so funny because when does it happen? All Thor was trying to do was cross the bridge. And Hercules like, well, I'm crossing the bridge. And Thor's like, okay, well, I'm crossing the bridge. Well, I'm going to cross first. No, I'm going to cross first. And then before you know it, we have a confrontation between Thor and Hercules. That's legit how the battle starts. Like, I can't make this stuff up. Like, really? That's what we're fighting over? But the fight was actually really good. Like, and I love how, like, Jack Kirby illustrated, like, this battle. Like, it's really dope because they're both showing off like their strength, right? They're showing off like, hey, I'm stronger, and they're trying to one up each other with each feat, and it was really cool. Like I really enjoyed it. It was a really cool story. Thor annual or Journey into Mystery annual #1, the only annual in the Journey into Mystery run. But it was really cool, and the battle was pretty much evenly matched, and it ends up getting stopped by Zeus. Zeus was like, hey, guys, he respected the fight so much that he was like, yo, like, we just can't let it end like that. And I respect you, Thor. And Thor showed his respect to Zeus. And, because he showed his respect to Zeus by bowing down to him and, paying homage and, not being disrespectful. And of course, he had a great battle with his son. Zeus allowed him to leave Olympus, and he actually created a portal for him to get out, and ended up closing the portal of Olympus. And you would think that would be the end of that tale, but of course that's not. And I think it actually segues into the latter part of the Journey into Mystery run, into the whole Thor run, where of course he has a lot more adventures with Hercules, and that's just introducing the Hercules character, getting the audience ready, right? The setup, pretty much setting you up to get ready for the character of Hercules. And one of the last bits that shows when it shows like it has like a art bonus at the end is like Asgard, and look at that, man. Kirby just was in his bag on this, man. I love how he does Asgard. It's just so beautiful, man. Like the drawings, I love. It's certain a nostalgia to it. I don't know. It's just something about his artwork. It just really draws me in. Like I just love how the colors pop. And the cool thing about this too, guys, like when you're getting these omnibuses, one of the things I do like is there's like it really captures everything that was going on during that time period. You get like the letters from the fans, which I love, by the way. Like, it's so funny to see like certain things like that the fans would say. Like, there was one fan in particular that was just saying like, hey, Stan and Jack, could you knock it off with the lovey-dovey stuff between Donald Blake and Jane Foster? I'm tired of hearing it. I don't want to hear that no more. I don't want to read that anymore about the romance stuff. Get to the good Thor stuff. I want to see Thor smash things. I want to see Thor have good fights. I don't want to see Thor being all googly-eyed over some chick. And then Stan or Jack will say something snide or smart, in response to it. Really, you Stan. Jack didn't really respond or anything. But Stan will respond and say something sly and slick, and, it would be really cool. And then, like, you can also see, like, other issues that were going on during that time. So they would promote their other brands, like Fantastic Four, the Avengers. And that was the cool thing, too, because in the later issues, you would see the crossovers between Thor and the Avengers in some certain cases. Like, you even saw other characters, like Daredevil was in the issue. Like, there was an issue where basically when Thor was going to fight the Absorbing Man, why Thor was gone, but while he was gone, there was this attack that was going on where, man, like, what are we gonna do? Like, Loki's coming, and he's kidnapping Jane Foster, and there's all these different events going on. There was a situation where Rick Jones, who is a friend of the Hulk, was actually a part of the Avengers at that time, and he was kind of like the eyes and ears for, you know, civilians, and, you know, keeping the ears to the streets and alerting, you know, people, Avengers, when stuff would go down. So he's letting like the team know, like, hey, you know, like, you know, stuff is getting real, stuff is hitting the fan, like, you know, Loki's coming. And they're like, well, where's Thor at? And, you know, no one knew. And it was like, yo, but he was out there doing the trials during that time. You know, he was doing the, you know, supposedly, you know, just he was elsewhere, you know, he just wasn't there. So it'll be stuff like that. You can see like little crossovers. There was a crossover with Thor and Magneto. I think I actually did that in a previous video where Thor met Magneto, and the X-Men weren't actually in the comic book, but you could feel their presence at the end of that. So, you know, Thor, it was cool seeing their first interaction, because I think Magneto thought Thor was a mutant, and, you know, Thor's like, I'm not a mutant, I'm a god. And that was a pretty cool encounter. Like, that was a pretty cool issue. That was a one-off, but that was still pretty cool. And then, of course, the classic Thor versus Hulk. Who could forget that, right? And that was kind of a continuation of one of the Avengers issues, right? So it showed you kind of what happened, you know, while they were going at it, you know, during that Avengers. I think it was Avengers 3? I think it was Avengers issue number 3, when Thor and Hulk had gotten into it, and then it kind of carried on into Journey into Mystery 112. That was a really cool issue too, by the way. I really enjoyed that fight. Let me see if I can find that one. That was a really good one. It's actually one of my favorite runs. And I think I actually talked about that comic book too. You know, pretty good detail. But I just want to kind of show you. Oh, this is really cool. This is like young Thor, young Loki, when they were kids. That's really cool. This is what I really love. That's what I really loved about the Tales of Asgard, man. Like, it was just really cool to see how they were during that age. So you really learned the origin of Loki. And, you know, of course, Loki was found by Odin, you know, when he attacked the storm giants, right? So he was attacking the storm giants, and, you know, he ended up finding a baby and adopting, and that baby was Loki. Loki, the king of the storm giants, was Loki's father. And he ended up adopting Loki as his son, you know, in hopes of making him good and not inherit the evil of his father, which didn't really seem to go too well for him, but I don't know. But yeah, this is the classic issue, man. Thor versus Hulk. The battle of battles, man. Like, this is the one that everybody always, like, wants to see, man. I love to see these guys go at it. Like, oh, man, it's so dope whenever they squabble, man. Like, they've had some epic bouts, man. I mean, like, Thor's had some good fights with a lot of people, but I love it when he fights the Hulk. Like, I always feel like Thor just, like, unloads, man. Like, they can just cut loose because they know that the other person can take it. So I always feel like they don't hold back in these fights. Even though I've heard, you know, I know there's been a couple of issues where they've said Thor, you know, he's held back because of Bruce Banner. I don't know. I think Thor goes pretty much all out when he fights the Hulk. I mean, I think there's maybe that initial, like, okay, I'm going to try to talk to you, but after that, nah, Thor's going in, man. But I love that. And actually, with this particular battle, too, Thor, Odin actually lifts his enchantment where Thor can be separated from his hammer, because that was the other thing at the time. Thor still couldn't be separated from his hammer, and he asked his father to, you know, unlift the enchantment to allow him to be able to fight to his full potential, even without the hammer. So Odin did that just for this fight. So that was really cool. So you can see some more stuff, more of the battle here. I just love that artwork, man. It's so dope. It's so dope. Oh man, yeah. This is actually a fun read, guys. Like, I really enjoyed every bit of this read. I really felt like this really made me appreciate the character more. So what I will say with this takeaway points, you know, for this, if you're into, you know, learning the history of the character, and really just want to learn where the character came from, I think Journey into Mystery Volume 1 Omnibus is amazing. If you're really a Thor fan and you really want to learn about the Thor mythos, where he came from, the buildup of Asgard, how Asgard came into fruition. Even the origins of Odin is in here. You know, you learn about his father, you know, Bor. You know, like there's so much mythology that's imbued there that I really think those tales of Asgard stories are really, to me, the meat, like the bread and butter of this particular run. Not to discredit the storytelling of, you know, the other, you know, the actual issues itself. Like I said, I really feel like it hits its stride like consistently, 114 through 120. The other stuff is good too. There's a lot of self-contained stories there. You do have a lot of great villains. You still have Loki, who actually gets really better as the series progresses, because like I said before, his manipulation gets a little bit more complex and there's a little bit more thought put into it as opposed to like the earlier issues. You do have some other cool villains like Mr. Hyde and Cobra that become mainstays in the Marvel universe. Not used as much today as they were probably back then, but they're still, you know, still somewhat, you know, relevant. I actually think Cobra is going to be in the new Captain America, if I'm not mistaken. You also have Grey Gargoyle, who's a pretty cool character. Another underutilized character. Anything he touches turns to stone. Of course, Amora, the Enchantress, and Scourge, who will also become really pivotal villains in the Avengers run. They actually spent more time, had more issues in the Avengers run than they did in the early Journey into Mystery issues. You know, so they actually were pretty key in those, but really cool villains. And of course, my favorite probably out of this particular run, I have to give it to Absorbent Man. I think Absorbent Man, of course, Loki is my all-time, like he's my favorite like Thor villain when it comes in general, but I do think that Absorbent Man, like in terms of just like impact and presence, you know, it really got interesting once he was inserted into this particular run. So with that being said, guys, one thing I would encourage you to do is if there's a character you're really into, whether it be Spider-Man, Daredevil, Punisher, Moon Knight, whoever, go back and read those earlier issues. I know a lot of people sleep on it and be like, oh man, it's too hokey, it's too corny. Don't listen to all that. Make your own like decision and judgment. Read a few issues, get a feel for it. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But I think that it's important just to at least give it a shot because this is where these characters came from. And I mean, a lot of the characters that we've known today wouldn't exist without these earlier issues. And I really think, to be honest with you, the storytelling gets really good. I love the artwork. Artwork doesn't bother me at all. I think the artwork is dope. Yes, it's a little wordy, so you're gonna have to. There's a lot of reading. It's gonna take you time to read. It took me probably about 3 months, you know, to read the whole omnibus. I think it's like about 800 pages, something like that, 750 pages, something like that, you know, for the omnibus. But you know, I just took my time with it. You know, read it when I felt like it, and you know, just appreciated the artwork, appreciated the literature, appreciated the story, and I really enjoyed it. And I really like that Tales of, like I said, the Tales of Asgard, man. And shout out to, because I actually have that comic book where it just has the whole run as a collective of Tales of Asgard stories. So shout out to Jaws Comics, Chris. You know, like he really looked out for me on that one. And, you know, hooking me up with a deal on that particular book. So I might just do a solo review on that because I actually really do like that. I just need to finish reading all of them before, you know, I get into that. But guys, you know, with that being said, man, like, yo, give it if you guys, you know, just are looking for something good to read but kind of want something a little bit more nostalgic, something like older. Check out Journey into Mystery 83. I think you might actually like it. Like I said, it starts off a little slow, but once it hits its stride, oh, you're hooked. Like, I was really hooked, guys. I really enjoyed this read. I'm actually wanting to get volume 2 so I can, and volume 3 so I can finish out that Jack and Kirby, that Stan and Jack Kirby run, you know, for this particular series. So I am looking to get volume 2, and I will be going over that once I find it. But for now, you know, I really enjoyed this read. I hope you guys enjoyed my breakdown of this omnibus and the Thor run in general for Journey into Mystery. But with that being said, you guys have a great day. I hope everything is well. Stay safe and peace.